Hi everyone, my name is Melda. I hope you're all well. I'd like to say that the response to my videos thus far has been really great. I appreciate all the hard work that went into them and all the responses I've received so far. I really thank everyone who has supported me in my channel. I love you guys. So today I'm gonna be making a different type of video. I've really wanted to make some more content, but just haven't had enough time on my hands. So I'm gonna make something different as opposed to the dramatic reading or voiceover videos that I'm doing. But in the meantime, I thought I'd make some more casual review type videos where, you know, if I don't have enough time and they just take a little less time to edit and assemble together, and I'll just kind of talk about whatever happens to be on my mind that I'd love to share with you all. And these kind of videos may seem a bit thrown together, but it's just more so the fact that they take less time, and I think the casual sort of nature should make it feel a bit more comfortable, I hope, to listen to. As most of you may have probably guessed at this point, yes, I am a massive Star Wars fan. I have been since I was about 7 or 8 years old. I love the original trilogy and the expanded universe most of all. And today I'd like to talk about some of the Sith Lords within the Star Wars galaxy. A huge part of why I love fictional storytelling in general is a compelling and well-written, entertaining villain. As much as I root for the hero of the story and I support and empathize with them, I do love a good villain. I mean, who doesn't? And to me, the best villains in Star Wars have undoubtedly got to be the Lords of the Sith, or at least those who all follow the Sith code. And now, whenever someone asks you or anybody else about who is your favourite Sith Lord or who is your favourite Star Wars villain, I think the answer usually tends to be Darth Vader or Emperor Palpatine or Darth Sidious. And Darth Maul even as well has received a lot of love, and he's become a fan favourite because of how well he's been portrayed in most of the time anyway in the new canon. However, to me, there are so many more other characters from the expanded universe of Star Wars that I personally love so much more than these characters. Now, don't get me wrong, I love them as well. I love Vader, Maul, and Palpatine as well. So much more, and they are great. But these characters who I want to be discussing today, they're a lot more interesting to me personally, and I love them a lot more. And I think that might be simply because they haven't gotten as much screen time, they haven't gotten as much mainstream exposure, I guess, that Vader, Palpatine, and, you know, the characters from the films have. Some of them anyway. In other words, they're not as well known by the general public, and that's mainly because of how Disney and modern-day Lucasfilm have been treating the EU. But anyway, so this video will be my 10 favourite Sith characters that I love more than Vader, Palpatine, or Maul. And this should go without saying for me at this point in my life, but I can completely do without any more Disney-related material to do with Star Wars, because it's not Star Wars to me. None of it's been good since 2012, and just any of it really, whether it be the films, shows, books, games, comics, all of it. Everything Star Wars to me, and everything that is Star Wars and that Star Wars stands for, is the expanded universe. And so that is what I will be discussing. And also, before we start, please bear in mind that this list won't be in any particular order from, like, you know, from, like, least favourite to all-time favourite or anything like that, like ascending order or something. It'll just be, you know, just no particular order, but I think I'll save my 2 absolute favourite characters for last. One more thing I will like to say before we start. I will mainly be discussing Sith Lords as those who remain Sith until the end of their stories. So characters like Revan, Starkiller, and Ulic Qel-Droma, unfortunately they won't be in the list, as, you know, those characters, they were able to find their own redemption before the end of their respective stories. And by the end of their stories, as far as I'm concerned, their stories ended with them becoming heroes by their actions. But I do still love those characters as well, much more than any of the movie characters, or at least most of the movie characters, I mean. And so, with all of that said, let us begin. These are my 10 favourite Star Wars villains, at least the Star Wars villains that I love more than Palpatine or Vader. So with our first entry is Exar Kun. Now, he's from the Tales of the Jedi comic series, specifically from the volumes Dark Lords of the Sith and The Sith War. And what I really like about this character is more so his journey, I think, rather than his actual personality, because he's just this sort of arrogant, grandiose Jedi who kind of lets his own ego and power get to his head. But what's interesting to me, what I find sympathetic, is how he was a true Jedi. You know, he was truly committed to being a Jedi, even before his fall to the dark side. He was just in denial about it. Exar Kun was the fallen Jedi of Jedi Master Vodo Siosk Bass, who fell to the dark side after confronting the spirit of the ancient Sith Lord Freedon Nad, and so Exar Kun went in search of forbidden knowledge that he was restricted from. The thing that I find really interesting about Exar Kun is his fascination with learning all corners of the dark side, not the dark side, the Force, and well, the dark side later when he fell to the dark side. The way I see it is the saying absolute power corrupts absolutely. I kind of see it with most Sith Lords, but in the terms of Exar, I definitely see it, because he hungered for knowledge, and that was like the starting point towards his path down the dark side. For me, I see him as the sort of Tai Lung of Star Wars. He's very similar to a way where he was raised in this institution as a great warrior. He learned all he could. He was an excellent fighter, but it was never enough for them. And in Exar Kun's case, the light side of the Force was never enough for him, because he'd probably studied everything he could from it. But he wanted to learn about more aspects of the Force, so he found out about the dark side and the Sith, and so he wanted to know about them in order to better understand their ways, so that he could better himself as a Jedi. He had the best intentions at heart, but once he became the Dark Lord of the Sith, he just began craving power, and for power's sake. As the comic series progresses, you slowly see his further and further descent into madness, into his lust for power just keeps on growing. He can't stop it, and he can't reconcile with it, he can't recognize it. Even when it was too late, even when he was eventually betrayed by his own apprentice, which becomes a common theme amongst the Sith Lords. The Jedi found him and eventually defeated him by trapping his spirit in the temples on Yavin 4. He still remained, but only as a spirit, and he was trapped in that temple. 4,000 years he remained there, until Exar Kun is really a story about how greed and lust for power and pride and arrogance can lead to one's downfall. But what I found really sympathetic about him was how he was truly committed to being a Jedi. He just wanted to be the best Jedi in the galaxy. He wanted to be the best there ever could be, and that was his fatal flaw. And the failing of the Jedi on his part was that they refused to instruct him further. Next on the list is Kreia, or Darth Treya, who I consider to be the greatest Star Wars character ever. She's a very unique sort of character, I feel, and she's one of the more well-rounded characters. She's very interesting, she's very intelligently written. She's the main antagonist of Knights of the Old Republic 2, the Sith Lords. She is one of your companions, your party members as you play the game, but then she's the twist villain in the end. Turns out to be the villain, the mastermind behind it all. Kreia sought to end the Force and use the dark side as a way of doing such a thing. Kreia has lived both lives as a Sith and a Jedi, but ultimately she's embraced her own darkest impulses and darker side without fully identifying as a Sith. She was a Jedi who was exiled out of the Order, a Sith Lord who was betrayed by her own apprentices and sapped of the Force. And then she found a new purpose. The reason why I like Kreia is just due to her mannerisms, and Kreia to me represents both sides of Star Wars, the Sith and the Jedi, and she seems to be sort of an embodiment of in-between. Although, even though she is clearly a villain, you'll understand her motivations the more you study her. There's a series of essays on her, and one of them that I found really entertaining and really well made is this essay that I'll show on screen now. This essay really helped me better understand her motivations, and I think it will to anyone else as well. Just go look it up on YouTube. It's a really interesting essay. It's really worth the watch and listen. Going hand in hand with Kreia, and from the same game, is Darth Nihilus, the Lord of Hunger. Now, I knew about Darth Nihilus because I got introduced to the game Knights of the Old Republic when I was about 10 years old, I think, or 12 years old. I can't really quite remember. But I was quite young when I first discovered Knights of the Old Republic 1 and 2. And when I first saw Darth Nihilus, he was the scariest looking thing that I'd ever seen on screen. Like, the way he sounded, the way he looked, the way he was built up in the game, the way the characters all speak of him, it just seemed unreal. It seemed like nothing I'd ever seen, like in Star Wars at least. He was a survivor of the destruction and devastation of the planet of Malachor 5, which occurred at the end of the Mandalorian Wars. He eventually felt a pain, but with the pain came a hunger, and it continued to grow within him until it spreads over the entire planet, and it will eventually spread over the entire universe, where he will just drain and consume anything of its Force energy to satisfy his hunger. Next on the list would be Darth Zana from the Darth Bane trilogy. She was a young Jedi in training who joined the Jedi Army of Light at the end of the New Sith Wars and went with her cousins to the final battle of Ruusan, but she got separated from them, and while she was being comforted by a friend of hers, the planet of Ruusan, two Jedi happened onto the scene and killed her friend, and so in her grief and rage she lashed out and killed both Jedi with the Force. Darth Bane found her and took her on as his apprentice to carry on his legacy as the new future Dark Lord of the Sith. Zana to me is a very interesting case because she becomes the protagonist and POV, point of view character in the second book in the series, Darth Bane Rule of Two. And what I find interesting about her is mainly just how she has an arc of her own, and how she struggles between a much more lighter side to herself, but she wants to continue her training as a Sith because she wants to grow stronger. She vowed never to be weak again, never to be one of the weak, and she learns through giving into her inner darkness that sometimes it's better for the others to suffer as long as it serves her own purposes. Next on the list is Darth Malak, the main antagonist of the first Knights of the Old Republic game. Alongside having the coolest voice ever, Malak is just an awesome Sith Lord. He's an awesome character. Malak was scary to me when I first saw him as well. He was, in a sense, the Darth Vader of Knights of the Old Republic, the first game anyway. He had the metallic voice, he had the lightsaber, he had the cool voice. He was just amazing. But what I find particularly interesting about him is at the end of his story, at the end of the game, you're able to, in a sense, redeem him. You go through the entire game, you see the actions and the after effects on everything that Malak has done to you to get you. Even with all the horrible things he's done, he destroyed planets, he bombed cities, he bombed planets, he took Jedi as hostage and kept them alive just to sap their Force energy to fuel his strength. Even with all of this, when you kill him at the end of the game in the final battle, he wonders what would have happened if things had been different, if he had actually found the same redemption that Revan had. So by the end of his story, I actually genuinely felt sad for Malak, because he didn't need to choose this path. Revan didn't need to take him down that dark path that he had done so when he was still Malak's master. He didn't need to become this monster, this tyrant. And he realizes that in his last dying moments. Next on the list is Darth Malgus, who is one of the main antagonists of the Old Republic era. Now, you'd easily recognize Malgus from the Old Republic cinematic trailers that are quite popular on the internet now, especially from the more recent one, Disorder. Malgus's original name is Veridon, but he took the name of Darth Malgus and remained committed to the ideals of the Sith because it fit in with what the lessons he was taught when he was growing up under his adoptive father about the way of warriors. And surprisingly enough, Malgus is such an honourable Sith. On one hand, you can see how cruel and horrible he is, but on the other hand, you see that he does have a compassionate side. You learn all of this, you learn everything you need to know about Darth Malgus as a character from the book Star Wars The Old Republic Deceived. You learn everything about his personality, and Malgus is just more than just a living weapon. He's more than just a mindless brute. Malgus, in a sense, he reminds me of two characters I really love. He reminds me of Guts from Berserk, specifically from Black Swordsman arc, where the more pain he takes, the more he still doesn't give in, and it just makes him stronger. And Malgus has been killed several times and still risen back up. He was crushed into a mountain. He came back after an extensive cybernetic reconstruction of his body. He was nearly killed again in the game, and that should have been the end of him. But I guess the writers decided it wasn't. But the point is, Malgus's belief is conflict and, fair play drives the individual to become stronger, because if they survive the conflict, their understanding of the Force evolves and they become stronger. And so he believes conflict is the only purpose in life, the only way for evolution. And Malgus also reminds me of Thanos from Infinity War, simply because of the fact of how, even though he is a tyrant and a monster, he does have a gentle side to him, that there is compassion in him, because he does care for someone. He cares about his lover, Elena, and he's in denial of it throughout the entire book. Then her life is threatened at the end of the novel, and he's forced to reveal his care for her. It is only then he realizes that he needs to purge himself of compassion, because he sees it as a weakness that can hinder him, and he sees the peace that the Sith Empire forged with the Republic as a weakness as well. And so he commits himself to it, and his first step is killing his own lover. And it's a really heartbreaking moment. It was a moment that caught me off guard. It shocked me. I didn't expect it coming, and I didn't expect it. And I never expected it to happen in that manner. Because when I read the book, and Malgus is said to be crying during it, which ironically is what Thanos does as well when he kills Gamora, who he saw as a symbolic daughter for him. It's just villains with a soft spot, or no matter how small, they always hold a certain fascination for me. After reading the novel Deceived, I became a little bit disappointed with Malgus's story in the game for the Old Republic, because I just kind of feel like they've been wasting him a little bit. When he took the control of the Empire and became the Emperor, it was just disappointing to see how short-lived it was, because I really wanted all of his sacrifices to be paid off. A bit like with Thanos, because that's what made him such a satisfying and well-written villain, is the fact that through his struggles and sacrifices and how the heroes treated him in the film, it made him seem like the underdog, and therefore it made us sympathize with him as a character. And so with Malgus, I kind of felt the same sense of sympathy, even if it was a little bit. And don't get me wrong, he is a horrible, horrible man, and again, I disagree completely, and I just think he's wrong in his general perspective. But at the same time, I was surprised to see how much honor there was to him. He lets Aaron Lanier, the main protagonist of the book, leave with her life, and he could have broken his word to her, but he didn't. A part of me is striving for Malgus's sort of success in the game, and I'm just interested to see what they could do with him now. I honestly don't like the bringing back of Aaron Lanier, though. I kind of feel like that was just lazy. I feel like her story was over and done by Deceived, in the Deceived novel, and it was just perfect the way they ended it. Especially after all that she's been through, she deserved her happy ending. She deserved to find her peace. Whereas Malgus, on the other hand, he cannot find peace. He cannot stop, not ever. So I was hit with a mixture of emotions when I ended the story of Malgus, because on one hand I wanted to see where it would all pay off with Malgus's story, and another thing hit home for me in obvious sense: Malgus has to die for everything he's done. And at the same time, I still remember the respect that he showed to those who fought valiantly against him. I remember how he kept his word to Aaron Lanier and so many others. I remember how he sacrificed everything he had ever loved, the only thing he had ever loved, Elena, to achieve his goals. And I remember of how much he did, how many he betrayed, how many he fought and killed, how much he suffered and struggled to become the strong Dark Lord of the Sith that he would become. Just know that if you haven't read the Star Wars The Old Republic Deceived novel, I highly recommend it. Go read it or get the audiobook read by Mark Thompson. It's fantastic. It's my favourite Star Wars novel, and it's one of my favourite novels ever. And I think anyone should read it. It's a fantastic story. And the book also has a very well-written, strong female protagonist, and Malgus is an exceptional villain. Next on the list would be Darth Warlock III. This character holds a special place in my heart because at the time when I first discovered him, he was in the comic series known as Star Wars Legacy, where he plays as one of the main antagonists. But what's interesting to me is that he's in one comic series. He has, well, I mean, he doesn't have few appearances, but throughout his earlier appearances, he doesn't get as much spotlight, and yet he's a fantastically written character. For me, Warlock is special not because of his fantastic design, which I simply love, but because of the role of the story that he is in. I guess you could say he's the archetypical villain sidekick or second in command to the main antagonist. Villain sidekicks, to me, I had gotten used to them just being bumbling, incompetent, and just generally not as intelligent or interesting as the actual main antagonist of the story. You know, characters like Grima Wormtongue or Peter Pettigrew and all that. But then you have other sort of characters who would transcend that archetype or that stereotype. The Silver Surfer or Harley Quinn, the second in command to the main antagonist, but there's so much more personality to them beyond that. And Darth Warlock III, for me, He was the first time where I saw a villain sidekick could be that, where they could be their own character, they could be their own interesting thing, they could be their own entity. Darth Warlock was a very intelligent and very logical thinking Sith Lord, and that was one of the aspects that draws me to his character, that makes me empathize with him, as well as his interesting family history as the regent to Darth Krayt. His betrayal and murder of Darth Krayt in the comics was a very shocking moment, and it was a very, very cleverly built up and developed moment, because you never would see it coming as a first-time reader, and yet it's a subversion that really, really works, because you don't get the inner workings of Darth Warlock's mind and his inner thoughts as much as you do the other characters in the comics, and that's what makes him so interesting and unpredictable. So whenever he was on screen, and when you learn that he's able to conceal his own thoughts, desires and motivations, it really makes him a much more interesting and well-rounded, fleshed out character. And there's several moments within his own story where he himself looks like a hero rather than a villain, and that's part of what draws you to a villain or a character, is when they're shown to be honourable or doing admirable good things, even regardless of whether or not they're the antagonist or the protagonist. And that's what helps us as the audience or the reader empathise with characters like that. He stood up to two of the most evil Sith Lords in galactic history, Darth Andedu and Darth Krayt. He killed Darth Andedu in single combat in a battle of the mind and willpower. He put one of the most cowardly and cruel villains in the Star Wars universe in his place and shut him up for good. He had the courage, even if he didn't have the strength or the power of his own master, he had the courage to kill his master when he saw that he was too weak to lead the Order of the Sith, and took it up on his own shoulders to lead the Sith to true glory in his own way, to impose his own vision of galactic conquest. But what's so fascinating to me about all this is because he comes from an era where the Sith no longer have an identity. They're only under one man, one banner, and that's Darth Krayt. Everything the Sith are, Krayt makes it seem as though it's only under his own will. Everything in existence is under his will. He is their life and death. And Warlock is the one who was able to break away from this tradition, to stop acting as his master's slave. Even if he did genuinely care for him at first, he decided Krayt was too weak to lead the Sith. And he also cared for his daughter, Sarai. Darth Warlock was one of the best things to come out of the Star Wars Legacy comics, and undoubtedly one of the best characters from the expanded universe, and one of the best characters I've ever seen. Next on the list is Darth Plagueis, the Mun Higo Damask II, or as he would become known as Darth Plagueis the Wise in the annals of Sith history. Now, Palpatine is maybe the ultimate villain of Star Wars, but I would kind of make the argument that Palpatine wouldn't even be there if it wasn't for his master, Darth Plagueis, the one who got him there to where he is in the first place. What's interesting to me about Darth Plagueis is everything that the Darth Plagueis novel shows us of how he set everything in motion. He's the protagonist character of the novel. He is the POV character as well, throughout most of the book anyway. And he just happens to be responsible for shaping the events of galactic history into the way it was. He introduced Palpatine to the cloning mechanisms, the Kaminoan scientists on Kamino. He first met the fallen Jedi Dooku before Palpatine ever did, before Dooku even left the Jedi Order and fell to the dark side. Darth Plagueis was the one who killed his own master in order to help bring the Rule of Two to fruition, and the Sith Imperative to fruition, to rule the galaxy. The only difference is that he became so obsessed with achieving immortality that he failed to lose sight of all else, even though he tried to genuinely bring about an order to the galaxy, that he believed it needed. Just like Kreia, Plagueis is he's just a fountain of wisdom. There's so much to learn from him. There's so much wisdom and intelligence beneath the veneer of a monster that he is. And he just embodies what the Sith are. They make no excuses for what they are. They make no pretense of morality. They just simply are what they are. And Plagueis is an example of that. But what I really find entertaining about Plagueis is how grandiose he is, how so full of himself he is, even after his most defeating moments. And the Darth Plagueis novel really does a good job of building up his mortality towards the end of his story when he gets betrayed by Sidious and killed by him.
Brilliantly assassinated.
Even when Plagueis is winning, even when the dark side is winning, when he and Palpatine are succeeding in manipulating the Senate and the Jedi Order, he still is given fresh reminders of his own mortality, and it quickens his pace that he needs to discover the true secret of eternal life. And so on the eve of Palpatine's election, he killed Darth Plagueis in his sleep. And Plagueis the Wise had never seen it coming, because he had been too trusting in his own apprentice, who he viewed as a son. The Darth Plagueis novel as well is also high on my recommendations to anyone. Whether you're a Star Wars fan or not, it doesn't matter. Just, if you want a good book, just read the Darth Plagueis novel written by James Luceno, and especially the excellent audiobook by Daniel Davis, which I love. The voiceover performance from the voice actor of Daniel Davis as Darth Plagueis is simply incredible. Just when you hear him speak Darth Plagueis' dialogue, when you hear him speaking as Darth Plagueis, this is exactly what Darth Plagueis should sound like. It's like if they ever got a casting for Darth Plagueis, if they did him well in a movie or anything, I would want no one else to do the voice for Darth Plagueis. I want Daniel Davis to do the voice for Darth Plagueis, because he is Darth Plagueis. Like, this is what Darth Plagueis should sound like. This is Darth Plagueis speaking, and it's just incredible. Now, before we get to my absolute favourite Sith, I want to just make two honourable mentions. I'll just quickly run through these characters. Naga Sadow from the Tales of the Jedi comics, specifically the Golden Age of the Sith and the Fall of the Sith Empire. I found Naga Sadow a really interesting character, and I was really intrigued by his conviction at what he believed the Sith Empire should become, and how he felt it had grown so complacent, and his desire to conquer the rest of the galaxy so that the Sith could further expand its domain and its resources and its empire. And his general underlying motivation was his pride that led him, ultimately, because of the Jedi blood that still runs through him, as he was descended from the Dark Jedi exiles who were cast out at the end of the 100-Year Darkness and found the Sith species on Korriban. And he was a very surprisingly cunning and intelligent villain. He was a very overpowered and menacing figure, and a very chilling antagonist. And the other mention I'd like to say briefly is Freedon Nad. Originally I didn't really think much of Freedon Nad but after watching the video made by the YouTube channel EvanNova95, the story of Freedon Nad, I gained a much more interesting understanding and a much more intimate understanding of the character, and the video does a good job at making you feel the emotions that he goes through throughout his whole story, from his training as a Jedi to his fall to the dark side, to his life after death as a spirit, to his complete destruction. And much like Darth Plagueis, it was his own arrogance and pride and self-overconfidence that he placed, especially in his disciple Exar Kun, who he led down the dark path that ultimately led to his downfall. And he just has such an awesome design right here in this artwork. This artwork is amazing. And I wish we could have gotten a novel based on the character. Much like Darth Plagueis, I would have loved to have found it interesting to see what they would have done with him as a POV character. I would have liked to have gotten a novel based on the Sith training that Nard went under, because he actually killed Naga Sadow as well.
Cost cutting.
But overall, Freedom Nard is another one of my favourite characters. And so, for my two favourite Sith Lords of all time, Darth Bane and Darth Krayt. And they both went on to remake the Order of the Sith in their own vision, and for what they believed. However, in the case of Darth Bane, he was more dedicated to the Order of the Sith, and he was willing to sacrifice himself for the Order. He put himself through so much pain and torment. He kept fighting, he didn't stop, he stood alone against an entire galaxy against him. And what's interesting to me is how he names himself Bane, because his actual name is Dessel, or Des for short, but his abusive father called him the bane of his existence, and so Bane took his name. Darth Bane is an anti-hero. His incredible struggles, his horrific childhood, his ambitious motivations, and his interesting... it will just leave you in awe of the character, and I promise you, if you read Darth Bane Path of Destruction, you will find yourself in empathy with the character. You will find yourself sympathizing with him and his goals, even though he is sinister. That's what I felt, at least, and I feel like that's what you will do as well if you read the novel. And I feel the same way with Darth Krayt as well, personally. He's got an incredible backstory with how much he's been able to take and keep moving, how much he was able to endure and keep moving, and his iron willpower that he had. I just can't say enough good things about the characters. I love them both. And Darth Krayt, to me, he embodies the ultimate Star Wars villain, as well as Darth Bane for me. To me, he is the culmination of what all the Sith built towards, all the generations of Sith. Like, he was the after effect of what Palpatine's empire did, and he was eventually the one who took Palpatine's example on and strived to become master of fate, of his own fate, which is ironic because in the end he couldn't even master himself, the damage that had been done to his body and how it was consuming him. And then he died, and then he was reborn and physically willed himself back to life after dying at the hands of Darth Warlock, and he became far more powerful and far more stronger. I would argue more powerful than Palpatine in some cases, definitely more powerful than Darth Vader. I find it interesting, especially at how cold and how detached he eventually becomes, how ruthless he becomes in his pursuit of eternal order. But it shouldn't have been by his word alone. The mistake that Krayt made is that, like every Dark Lord, he placed his own reign as a higher priority. But more than that, I pity both characters. I love both of these characters, not just because they are very powerful, and not just because of their awesome designs. I'm somehow able to feel for these characters and actually sympathize with them, and sometimes I'm actually able to root for them and their goals, even though they're sinister, and I've never experienced that with a villain before. The first time where I actually felt like that. I can't even do that with Palpatine. I can't do that with Emperor Vitiate at all. He's just an evil guy. Same thing with Grievous and Darth Maul. They have no character in the films. Darth Bane and Darth Krayt, they're not just evil for the sake of being evil. They are incredibly human, realistic characters, and there is a reason for every single decision they make and the philosophy that they build around themselves. They happen to be responsible for shaping the events of galactic history far more than even Palpatine and Vader ever did. But most of all, because of that, I pity both characters. I feel a sense of sympathy. I feel sorry for them and all the pain they've endured. And I pity them for how they attempt to project that same pain onto everyone else in the galaxy. They'd ended up becoming the most warped beings you could possibly imagine. Overall, Darth Bane, the Sithari, the prophesized perfect being, destined to destroy the Sith Order and return it to its rightful state. And Darth Krayt, the Dragon of the Sith, my two favorite Dark Lords of all time. And that's all I really have for you today. I'm planning on working on a number of different other projects, but I just wanted to try and do something a little bit different. And this is my first time really doing a video like this, so I hope it turns out well. I hope you enjoy. Thanks for watching, and please like the video if you enjoyed. And I hope you check out these various pieces of media as well, and stories that I recommend to you. They're all very good, and even if you're not a Star Wars fan, I definitely think you'll enjoy them. Thanks for watching, take care and stay safe.